For a whole generation, it felt like illegal and underground street racers dominated gaming. We had Need for Speed Underground 2, Midnight Club 3, Burnout Paradise, Juice, and even the horny street racing syndicate.
You know, I got a thing for bad boys and fast cars.
With their loud visuals, huge customization, tuner culture, intense police chases, and that very specific fantasy of illegal racing in the middle of a living city. By 2009, the Need for Speed franchise had passed 100 million units sold. But today, illegal street racing games are disappearing. Modern racing games still exist, arguably bigger than ever, but the specific fantasy of underground street racing has slowly been declining for years. I wanted to know what led to this decline, and as we will uncover, the lore, game design, and player attitude are all reasons for contributing to this. A starting point for all of this decline is licensing. As many of you are already aware, and if you've watched my licensing video last year, licensing and its wonderful laws have a chokehold on the racing genre. To be able to keep an authentic game developers have to strike deals with car manufacturers to ensure real cars are able to be used in their games. A big part of what makes these games special is being able to use these real-world cars we like, want to see, use, and potentially buy. Therefore, developers are always looking to place as many real branded cars in their games. The issue with licensing is that it leaves game developers in an extremely vulnerable position, in which they have to rely on car brands to ensure they have a complete game. When something is licensed, the original IP owner, so the car manufacturer in this instance, has the power to dictate how their IP can be used. Problem is, car brands can be extremely strict, protective, and demanding of their IP. And that is a difficult hurdle to manage for street racers because these games in theory want to show customization, collisions, and sometimes illegal behavior. To put simply, manufacturers do not like licensing their vehicles for the depiction of illegal street racing. With a famous example being Toyota, who tweeted they would not feature Need for Speed because it depicted illegal street racing. Well, that's case closed then. But of course it isn't that straightforward. Because as a subscriber of this channel, you already know that the law never is. A lot of you will be thinking by this point that we have plenty of street racing games with real cars. That is correct. So licensing itself isn't the only reason for their decline. What is evident is that there is an inconsistent attitude towards featuring in these type of games, a more reluctance from the manufacturers. What I mean by this is that they would rather avoid being in these type of games if they can, but they do not always follow this. Licensing effects can be seen all the way back to Midnight Club 1, where Take-Two reported that they decided to use fictional vehicles for Midnight Club 1 and 2, as few car manufacturers wanted to be associated with illegal street racing, and Rockstar wanted realistic car damage to be seen when racing in the game. This is an issue that has been present since the year 2000. However, at the same time, Need for Speed had no issues depicting the very same thing. What does this tell us? Well, that there is a clear inconsistency because licensing deals are dependent on the power and influence of each party. In this instance, Need for Speed was able to strike deals because at the time they were the leading car game. This level of popularity would be seen as incredible marketing for the car businesses, where their future potential customers would be using their cars. And Rockstar didn't have this level of influence back in the year 2000, but by Midnight Club 3, with the success of GTA, Rockstar was able to get these licensed cars into the game. Think of this logically. Why do car brands want to feature in games in the first place? Because it's free advertising and exposure to kids who will grow up to idolize the cars. But they are only willing to do this if they can guarantee enough eyes on their cars. For a lot of us, our first impression of a car would have been within a game. That level of exposure has a huge impact on our opinions of cars, more than you might give it credit. I'll even prove it with myself as a case study. My favorite car from Need for Speed Underground 2 was the TT. Today I drive the same car because I fell in love with it back in the 2000s. These car brands know they cannot afford to miss out on the advertising and impression a game like Need for Speed and Forza may have on its audience. It's more detrimental for them to miss the game than stick by whatever other reason they could possibly have for missing out. And that's why we have over 500 cars in Forza Horizon 6. The brands are desperate to feature their cars in popular street racing games, with some even depicting nearly their entire catalogue. To put simply, money talks more than their supposed morals for avoiding street races. Now, even though popular series do have the leverage to still be able to make these games, it is clear these car manufacturers still hold immense power to influence the design choice and gameplay of street racing games. So although they may not refuse to feature in these games, they can still heavily influence what type of game is being produced, because developers don't want to push the limits of a street racer in fear of losing potential brands. And this fear has spawned what you know as the festival street racer. By this point, some of you may have commented, Oro, we do have street racers that are popular. we have the Horizon series, one of the biggest racing game series ever released. Again, you are totally correct to raise this. Forza is amazing, and I have been having a great time playing Forza Horizon 6. I think I've clocked nearly over 40 hours in the game already. Something about exploring Japan with the game's feel and handling models just does something to me. So far, it's probably in my top 3 racing games ever. But this isn't true to what this video is about. Forza and I guess the crew are not the illegal street racers we used to have. They are a product of this fear. The problem I have is that these games portray this festival, everyone is happy vibe that really clashes with the immersion of the street racing culture. This theme isn't bad in itself, it makes sense of these games, but man does it harm that illegal street racing feel. When I think of illegal street racing or just street cruising in general, I'm always visually taken to the early 2000s Japanese underground car scene, or even the Fast and Furious movies. Those visuals, the stories, the cars driven, that culture is what street racing is at its true peak. Compare that with Forza Horizon 6, you can see how that festival feel instantly clashes with the underground feel. Now, driving through nighttime Tokyo on maxed out ray trace graphics is a beautiful sight, the immersion is unreal, but this game could have done so much more to create a fuller underground racing scene. When you drive through Tokyo at night, at first it does capture you, but after a while you kind of see how soulless it feels, lacking the real density and complexity that the city is known for. To start off with, many roads lack populated cars. There will be an occasional car that pops here and there, which is okay, and we do now have parked cars on the side of the roads. But when you compare this to Midnight Club 3, which has a Tokyo map and came out over 20 years ago, you can see how this PS2 game has more life within the city than Forza, or at least in parallel with it. This issue is exemplified in the races themselves. A majority either have no incoming traffic or very minimal traffic, which doesn't really add to immersion of street racing. This isn't just a Forza problem, and I don't want to knock them for it. Even titles like Need for Speed Heat had the same issue. The races feel less unregulated and more on rails, like an event. So what impact would licensing have on this? To me, it seems by keeping traffic and collisions low, it sort of masks the idea of racing in the streets illegally. Horizon does this so well. The barriered streets, protected places, it turns the street races into street circuits, kind of like F1. Developers are actively watering down these games where the only illegal or underground street element is that the race is happening on the street, and there is some level of destruction to barriers, trees or posts. And I think this fear to embrace the true nature of a street racer really harms the feel of these games. In some ways, the atmosphere of PS2 era racers were generally stronger despite the weaker hardware, and that just isn't acceptable for these modern games that have had over 20 years of technological advancement. Yet in some respects, the immersion has barely evolved. If Underground 2 received a remake tomorrow, the gameplay loop would still feel surprisingly close to modern day racers. But why? Because on paper, modern technology should allow for the most immersive street racing games ever created. But there are several reasons developers may intentionally avoid pushing these systems too far, and not all of them relate to licensing or legality. Firstly, it can be simply frustrating for players to constantly hit incoming traffic whilst racing or cruising through the streets. At the end of the day, these games are still supposed to be fun and accessible. I don't fully agree with that design choice because I think it harms the difficulty and removes part of the dangerous underground feel. But I understand why developers make that compromise for casual players. And secondly, performance becomes a massive issue for these games. A truly populated modern city with realistic traffic density, advanced AI systems, destruction physics, and modern graphics would be incredibly demanding on hardware. Take Forza Horizon 6 for example. The CPU would probably melt trying to simulate a genuinely realistic and alive city at that graphical fidelity. And because racing games are heavily judged on visuals and smooth performance, developers often sacrifice world density and systematic complexity to preserve graphical quality and stable frame rates. So a combination of licensing, design choice, and hardware limitation has meant that street racers have really stagnated in terms of the overall density, immersion, and dangers of street racing. But there's also other factors at play. When I tell you it is a tragedy what has happened to customization in street racing games. Back in Need for Speed Underground 2 or many other similar games in that era, you could customize your car to the absolute max. I'm talking multiple options for bumpers, exhausts, suspensions, grills, the hood. You could even put some f***ing JBL speakers on the back if you wanted to. This was a straight episode of Pimp My Ride. Who remembers that show? I remember watching this one episode that I swear they put a chocolate water fountain in the back of this guy's whip. I hope I can find a clip of that somewhere and put it in, but honestly, looking back now, I just don't even understand what that show was about. Anyways, my point is that customization was crazy. And to be honest, it is an inconsistent feature of street racers that they have maintained and removed throughout the years, depending on the title. But when you compare older titles to the newer ones today, there is clearly a massive decline in customization options. For Forza 6, I was hoping for slightly more customization than their previous games. Forza are known to offer you like one different bumper and some stickers on your car, so I was hoping for a little more. However, disappointingly, the visual customization is again very limited with like 1 to 2 visual options per car part. Don't get me wrong, some cars do have more than others, but it doesn't come close to the PS2 era. So why are these new games so reluctant to allow full customization options? The main thing blocking it is brand image. These car manufacturers dislike when their vehicles are altered. As to them, it is being disingenuous to the car and their brand. The most extreme example of this is Ferrari refusing any title to even allow a simple body modification on their cars. The only thing they will allow, and this is probably with reluctance by them, is a slight change of the paint. It is so extreme that even in games like Need for Speed, customizing a Ferrari is not possible. And for some car brands, being able to add a spoiler, put a carbon fiber hood, and make the car like purple makes the car look cheap, like a toy, and so they refuse to allow it. They want cars presented as their perfect products. For example, a car company may ask, why are we associating our family SUV brand with illegal racing and reckless customization? That isn't our target audience. Therefore, protecting their brand image is vital to ensuring a consistent image to potential customers. This is something we tend to overlook. This isn't a brand and product that only exists in games. Take Ferrari's consistency. Any red sport car without any branding is instantly recognized as a Ferrari, even if it isn't. Our brain associates the color red and a sport-looking car to a Ferrari. That's how powerful consistent branding is, and brands want to protect that. So while players often see customization restrictions as pointless, manufacturers view them as protected intellectual property and long-term brand image. The problem is that street racing culture itself revolves heavily around customization. The visual identity of the cars is the culture, especially today, as real-world law enforcement has cracked down on illegal racing. Car culture has shifted more heavily towards meets, shows, and social media presentation. The flex is no longer necessarily the race or the speed at which the car can go, but the build of the car itself. And because modern games are increasingly constrained by manufacturer control, they are struggling to fully reflect that culture. Which is frustrating because modern technology could theoretically allow the deepest customization systems ever created. Imagine designing custom body kits, community-created parts, hybrid conversion between two cars, even advanced interior customization, something heavily neglected in these games. The potential is pretty much endless, but sadly the restrictions are tighter than ever, and restricting such a big part of street racing culture is inevitably killing the games that represent it. The final factors I want to raise that may have influenced the success of these games is our change in attitude towards them and the rise of competition from other games. Street racers have always leaned towards the more arcade feel. The gameplay of these games often involves just holding right trigger, hitting a slight drift, and maintaining a car at full speed without consequences. The difficulty in driving is practically non-existent, and as a consequence of this, the innovation in gameplay has been quite lackluster over the years. Again, if you compare an older PS2 title with a newer game, yes, the graphics and car feel have improved, but in terms of actual gameplay, there isn't enough differences to be classed as innovation. Now, there isn't an issue with this type of gameplay design, especially for those who want a chiller experience. However, it can get boring very fast, and if this is like your 20th arcade racer, that boredom just piles up and players simply seek other games. There is only so many times a player can unlock the same fleet of cars, customize them, and outpace a brain-dead AI with little difficulty. So a natural answer to this from the player base has been to transition from these arcade games to more simcade or sim racers, which involves real regulated racing. There's a subgenre of racing that is really growing year on year, with titles like Gran Turismo selling over 16 million copies. And this is a transition I have made myself, and I'm sure many of you can agree to this. Once you make that change from an arcade racer to a sim racer, it can be very difficult to go back to the arcade racers, because sim racers provide an experience of gameplay that these street racers are missing. Real technical difficulty in driving. It rewards pushing cars to the limit in an authentic way that often feels more dangerous than the street racers. Hit that apex too quickly and your whole race is ruined. It's a feeling unmatched by the arcade games. However, arcade races are still very popular. You would be naive to ignore that. Forza Horizon 6 at the time of recording this has already hit 6 million sales, and they're not even selling the game on PlayStation. Even an Arcadia title like Mario Kart 8 has sold 70 million copies. Racing games' most popular games are arcade races. That formula is still very much popular. If the game is good, it will sell. But Forza and Mario Kart do offer more than simple game design found in Need for Speed. Forza does have some sim-like features, and Mario Kart obviously has their dynamic power-ups. These innovative features provide a better gameplay loop than a traditional street racer, and it's this lack of innovation that has meant players have potentially outgrown this subgenre, and without new and returning players, the genre has been slowly declining. So what does this mean for the future of these games? Well, through my research, it became evident that racing games are becoming extremely expensive. The licensing, physics, and audio can see some modern titles cost around 50 million just to produce. And bear in mind that these games are often live service games, the cost could easily rack up to close to 100 million. And somehow all of that would need to coexist with manufacturers who already dislike illegal racing. Therefore, the negotiations for this would be extremely difficult and the cost would be enormous, which creates a brutal reality for the perfect street racing game. Why spend hundreds of millions making a risky underground street racer when safer racing games already exist? Until car brands ease up on their licensing conditions and game developers have more freedom to depict the fantasy, nothing will change. With Need for Speed, the last titan in this genre, being shelved by EA, I honestly think the traditional street racer with licensed cars will continue to fade from mainstream games, and that is a sad end to one of the greatest eras in gaming.
Make sure you do all your racing in the game. On the streets, drive safely and responsibly, and wear your seatbelt.